There is no finer gift I can give Bill Landis than a day of nothing but offensive line talk. It is a William Wednesday, the podcast daily.
Wow.
Bill Landis special. Berm and I are here, but we're just going to sit back and listen to Bill talk about Ohio State's offensive line. Review and preview. We're running out of position groups, and we're getting short on time until Ohio State's back on the practice field, which we're thankful for that. But I think there is a lot to discuss with the offensive line group, Bill. So just do it. All right, get into it.
Sure. I think my shorthand is like they ended up having a very good year, and I think they're going to be pretty good this year. I don't like, especially on the interior, right? This is pretty solid with four guys can start, and Josh Padilla like knocking on the door. I couldn't tell you the last time Ohio State had that many guys like coming into a season that you thought would be able to start across those three positions. And I guess like tackles number wise are thin, but I don't think they're hurting for talent with the two guys they brought in via the transfer portal. So like as long as Ian Moore is like ready to go as a second year guy, I guess. I don't know. I feel pretty good about things. I think that like the coaching arrangement is interesting, and it should be a pretty fun year, I think, to follow Ohio State's offensive line. I don't know. Usually we have these all season conversations and I find something to be like fairly concerned about. And I don't know that I feel that about this group going into 2025.
Oh my goodness. What a day.
I just want to know, Bill, let's just go back to this time last year. Do you feel better about the tackle situation heading into 2025 than you did heading into 2024?
That's a good question. I don't know. Like, I don't think either of Ethan Onyanwa or Philip Daniels individually are better than Josh Simmons was going in, like coming off of 2023, going into 2024. But I think in tandem, I maybe could say yes. And it's not like Josh Fryer was a solid player for Ohio State. I don't know for sure that Josh Fryer is an NFL player, but I think that Ethan Onyanwa and Philip Daniels, and Onyanwa after next year and Daniels maybe 2 or 3 years down the line, will be. So because of that, I guess I do kind of feel better with an acknowledgement to how good Josh Simmons was and how big of a loss that was. I think if you use the sort of aggregate of the two positions, I do think Ohio State could be better.
It's pretty wild that Ohio State could be in that sort of shape on the offensive line this spring, heading into 2025, given the losses of Josh Simmons, Donovan Jackson, Seth McLaughlin, and the position coach in Justin Fry. And it's like, guess what? Looks like they're going to be better. And especially even wilder when you put it in the perspective in like November and then heading into the playoff. Like we had a full, episode of the Stock Watch for like, is Justin Fry going to be around? Can the Ohio State offensive line fix all the issues that popped up on November 30th? It's been an absolute roller coaster. And now it's like peaking to this new height potentially. Now they have to go out and actually do it starting in spring, and all those guys are going to have to continue to make improvements and gains, especially on the interior, and the transfer portal guys are going to have to fill in and claim full-time starting jobs at the Ohio State level. So like it's not like it's finalized, but it's a real whirlwind to think about the last 4 or 5 months for Ohio State's offensive line. It's hard to even comprehend.
Yeah, but they earned it. They did earn it, though, didn't they? Like with the way they played in the playoff against those particular defenses, it's just like, I don't know. Sometimes position groups have a lot of questions, and then they just sort of answer them all emphatically. And I kind of feel like that's what Ohio State's offensive line did. And maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm feeling too good about it. I don't know. Maybe I'll seem foolish in the long run for being kind of as comfortable with the situation as I am right now. But I think they just did a nice job of addressing their needs in the portal and have a bunch of returning talent on the interior that's really exciting. And I don't know. I guess like to be a little more, I don't know, devil's advocate about it. Like you probably want one more tackle that you can play. But even then, I don't know, like Austin Sareveld can play tackle and did at points last year. I'm sure he'll cross more, and
Tegrish should do that as well.
Yeah. So like I guess it's not the best thing in the world for that to be your answer, but at least they would have some answers to search for. So it just feels like it's in a decent spot. I'm not saying it's in a perfect place. And I think to be better than they were last year, like it's a high bar to clear, or at least at the end of last year, especially for Onyanwa at left tackle. It's like, who are you replacing? First round talent at left tackle, and then a guy who like rewrote what people thought of him by playing like a first round left tackle against some of the best defensive ends in the country. So good luck to you, young man from Rice, stepping in to those shoes. But he seems like he has a ton of potential. So, like even what could be considered like concerning for me almost gets outweighed by kind of how exciting it is, because I just can't kind of wait to see the group get out there and see what they're made of.
It's truly bananas. We talked about a lot of this stuff with Justin Fry when we did the 24 Ever series, which is on the channel, and you should probably watch it if you haven't, folks, from last Friday. But that roller coaster that Austin's talking about, like that started in August, and it was not like it started in August and then everything leveled out and it was fine. Then October 12th, you lose Josh Simmons for the year. You go to Northwestern. 3 days later, you lose Seth McLaughlin for the year and have to replace him at center 3 days before the Indiana game, a game against an unbeaten top 5 team in Indiana. Then you have the Michigan situation and how bad that went. But in between there, you still lost Zen Mahalski and forced yourself to move Donovan Jackson over. Then you get to the playoff, and Austin Sareveld and Tegra Shabola are both hurt and rotating themselves out. And we're all questioning, are they insane? Why on earth would they rotate 3 guards in this situation? And come to find out, well, it actually happened because they had no choice because these other guys were hurt. And so then all of a sudden you're like, oh, but how many people can they really replace on this offensive line? And not only do they go out and win the national championship, but they pretty much dominated across the offensive line. And this is a conversation we've already had before, but when you're replacing Donovan Jackson, who is a borderline first-round pick right now, according to pretty much every single NFL draft agent or specialist or fanatic, you have Josh Simmons, who's looking like he's going to be the second tackle taken in the draft and the first-round pick. You lose the who's the center?
Remington.
The award winner in Seth McLaughlin. And the idea that you could potentially be better is truly nuts.
Yeah, we knew that Austin Sareveld was working through injury, but we didn't really, a lot of the conversation we had about Tegra Shabola was like, well, he just seems to have hit a wall. He's not playing as well. It looks like maybe he's suffering through a crisis of confidence, or we don't know. It turns out that was an injury too. So Ohio State was just like duct taping this together and getting through practices in December and January and holding its breath. Like, Justin Fry telling that story on 24 Ever last week is like the last practice before full contact practice before the national championship. It's like you just like cross your fingers and cross your toes and hold your breath that nobody gets hurt. You're picking up a blitz. Like, I don't know that we had a full appreciation that was continuing into the playoff run, because then they just started playing well. It's like, hey, they're playing all 3 of them, and Tegra's seemingly on the upswing again, and he's making a big block here, and Carson Hinsman is doing what he needs to do at center, and here comes Luke Montgomery, and Austin Sareveld's filling in for these reps. It's like, well, this is amazing. Maybe they should have just done this previously, but actually doing that in the midst of all the adversity and in the midst of all the injuries, and while still working through them without a safety net behind them as they got stretched so thin is truly remarkable. And I do think that is feeding into this sense of optimism, where even if you have to replace some of these guys, that core group in the middle, where now you're building around 4 guys who've had experience, who've been out there during a championship run, even if you have a new position coach or new quality control analysts or anybody else, like those guys know what to do, and they still haven't reached their full potential, any of them.
Yeah, they're all pretty young, right? Even like Tegra, who I guess is going into his 4th year, like hasn't played a ton. Has 1 season of starting experience under his belt. That's what makes it exciting, and I think part of that, and I think coaches will probably tell you this, like part of maturing as a football player, I think, is like figuring out how to play when you're not 100%. And I'm sure a lot of those guys were figuring that out along the way, because there were times like the first Oregon game, like clearly like Tegra was dealing with something, was not himself, and I don't know that he. It took him a couple of weeks, I think, to like really kind of get his feet back underneath him. And Austin Sareveld being limited as well, like he just got to figure out how to play around it. And to their credit, they did. But so that should give them confidence. But I think what's more encouraging and exciting is the fact, well, now they have an entire offseason to keep building physically, and they're going to be presumably healthy by the time the season rolls around. And even if they're not, they've got this built-in depth. So I guess there's a thing hanging out there of them having to make sure that they get to August with all this depth, on the interior still on the roster. But I don't know that I'm worried that they're not going to, because they also laid a blueprint last year while winning a national championship for how they can kind of all play at the same time, even if they are all available. So it certainly changed my mind, like on the feasibility of rotating on the offensive line, because I fully anticipate that being the case this year, as long as they have those 4 guys ready to play. And I'm assuming it'll be with Hinsman at center and the 3 other guys rotating around him at guard. I guess the one thing that's like in the back of my mind is a potential like wrench and all that is that Carson Hinsman did play really well when he played guard against Penn State. I mean, like maybe I would say that was the best he looked, even though he did a really nice job of stepping in at center for Seth McLaughlin. I still think the best game he played was that game at guard against Penn State. And if Josh Padilla is really ready as he goes into his 3rd year to perhaps take over as the starting center, or at least play some at center, does that open the door for Hinsman playing some guard and center, or just playing guard? I don't know. I'm not trying to make a mess out of a situation that feels pretty clean right now, but I guess that speaks to like the options they have too, which is, it's certainly not a bad thing to have, 4 or 5 guys for 3 spots that you really believe in.
Yeah. So much of the security I think that you feel heading into the spring is obviously you have Tegra and Luke Montgomery and Austin Sarabel, those guys who stepped up and played really well. But it's that you saw Ohio State be aggressive in the transfer portal and go get the tackles that they needed in December. And we're not heading into the spring having the same questions about the depth or who are going to be the starters as we had in the past. But it's also like comparing it and contrasting it to the defensive tackle situation where you're like, man, maybe they should have been more aggressive in the December window to go get someone. But at this point now, you feel pretty good. Like those guys, Philip Daniels and Ethan Anyanwa, got brought in to be the starters. And so you can look at it, and even though we haven't seen much of them playing, because obviously they played at Rice in Minnesota, and you didn't watch a whole lot of Rice football last year, I wouldn't imagine. And Philip Daniels really only played the last 4 weeks of the season as a starter for Minnesota, but you can at least look at them, and then you get to see them during the playoff run. And those are big dudes. Like physically, they look like an upgrade over Josh Simmons and Josh Fryer just from a physical standpoint. So now we got to see how that translates to the field. But Ohio State's willingness to be aggressive and go get them, I think, is part of that calm that you feel about it, even though it's a position that in a normal year, losing 2 potential first round picks and the best center in the country, and having to do that while replacing a starting quarterback and 2 starting running backs that were all big, all American caliber players. Like that would normally give you some pause and be like, oh my gosh, you need to have all this stability on the offensive line. But it feels pretty cut and dried to me how it's going to work out. At least the apex being Carson Hinsman, and then you figure out the rotation, I guess, between those 3 guards. But everything else seems like it's pretty simple, except for, as Bill said, who's your depth at tackle, which to me is like the biggest question on the offense. Even the quarterback controversy.
It'll sound like recency controversy. Yeah. It'll sound like recency bias or even hyperbole. But there have been years where you could look and say, well, this is going to be the 5. I don't think that, there's a tremendous amount of debate. There may be one position that is up for grabs and you focus on that. But to have this feeling that they have all 5 and then a surplus, I definitely don't remember that happening in 13 years that I've been covering Ohio State, where it's like you have a 5 that you can pencil into a depth chart and like 3 others at least that could go in there that have experience or played at a high level. For all of the, the criticism that Justin Fry took, some deserved, maybe some not deserved. And looking at the recruiting or the development or the transfer portal success of the previous years, like I'm not here to write any of that off or justify it. But if you look at the group that is in place right now,
did you say you're not here to Justin Fry it?
I'm not here to Justin Fry it. That's pretty darn good what's there right now. And you could say, was it built to last beyond that? Are there holes that they could fill when we're talking about tackle? Yeah, like they probably could use one more, although they have a more that's right there. And Bill, I know you've been very high on him, and so is Berm. And I guess we're just going to make more puns about the offensive line.
I do like Ian Moore. I just think like for a very young player, he sort of looks the part. He's got to get out there and play more and show it. But I even like, garbage time snaps are what they are. But even in the few that he got, I thought he just kind of looked like a solid sort of like strong player for a young age, and you can build upon that certainly. So if he's a third tackle, that's great. And I've been saying too, Burn might be, probably can correct me on this. I've been saying that Ohio State has 5 scholarship tackles, because I am unsure of how to categorize Javon McFadden, who I know Ryan Day has at least mentioned could play tackle, one of the incoming true freshmen. Like, do you view him as a tackle or a guard or a swing guy, or what's the right read on him?
Ohio State views him as a swing guy. I view him as a guard. He is kind of a Donovan Jackson type, in my opinion. Like, he's played tackle. He's very aggressive, really good footwork, like super mean. Like, if you're looking for Ohio State to have like an offensive lineman with more of a nasty streak, like that's Javon McFadden.
Yes.
I think the question is really not about him so much as, is Deontay Armstrong ready to emerge and be tackle number 4? Because if he's not ready to be tackle number 4, then you have major questions. Because yes, Carter Lowe, which when we heard Ryan Day on signing day, he was talking about Carter Lowe, who was a 5-star offensive tackle prospect according to Rivals.com, and I think a high 4-star or composite 5-star for everyone else. Like, Carter, when you look at him, he looks much more like an offensive tackle to me than Javon McFadden, but the play style might suit Javon a little bit better to be out there. So when you're looking at this group, to me, the question is Deontay Armstrong. Can he emerge and be ready to go? If you're counting on one of the freshmen, again, at any position, it's a risk. If you're counting on an offensive lineman freshman, you have some serious depth concerns. So we are going to have another portal window. Am I going to be shocked entirely if Ohio State tries to find an offensive tackle with some experience? I'm not going to be surprised if that happens, and I think that they should do that. But as far as pure upside goes, if you can get the best out of Ian Moore and Carter Lowe in the next 3 years, I think that's 2 pretty darn good tackles. Especially considering you'll have Philip Daniels there for what we expect would be 2 years after after transferring. So McFadden, the Armstrongs, there's guys there, but they are going to need another one, and I don't think that changes regardless of how good Ian Moore looks this spring. If Ian Moore doesn't seem like he can emerge and contend for playing time with Philip Daniels or Anianwa, then I would actually contend you probably need to find 2 more.
Well, I think you're right, because sorry to cut you off, Austin, but they only have 14. Like, regardless of what you think of the positions, there's 14 scholarship offensive linemen on this team. And I think ideally you'd like 16, right? 8 and 8, or like at least 15. So they probably are 1 short. But when you are but it's as like clear cut as it is right now, like who's going to play the most, and you also have like some pretty compelling young guys, I'd imagine it's a hard sell to somebody who's like, hey, we need backup offensive linemen. Or even if you're like a young guy who's only been playing for a year, you're still gonna have to come in and compete with like Carter Lowe and Javon McFadden. I don't know exactly how enticing that might be for a lot of players.
Yeah. What's the lineup look like at Virginia Tech at tackle? I don't know. Just spitball some options there.
You got to remember, Tyler Bowen didn't coach the offensive line there, which is.
I bet he would know if those guys could play offensive line or not.
Maybe
that's true.
But it does sound like we pretty seamlessly transitioned into what I thought. We have been pretty exuberant in the praise for this group. Like, is that depth at tackle the only real concern that exists here, or is there anything else?
That's it for me. It's just like I actually think they will come out or like go into camp feeling good about 3 with the 2 transfers they brought in and Ian Moore. And then it's just like a numbers conversation. Do you think you need another body there? For me, I don't even know if it's because, like, it'd be great if you have 5 offensive tackles that you think you can play, but show me a team that has that. Like, you're a little greedy at that point. But you do need a sort of a minimum number of bodies, I think, to get through the season. And I guess I would say that Ohio State's not quite there at that position. But in terms of talent, I think they have 3 that are, in my opinion, going to be Ohio State caliber by the time they go play Texas. But maybe you feel like they need 1 more.
Yeah, and to again compare it to the defensive line, I think that when you look at who they lost from last year, and it's not just the guys that you're expecting to go to the NFL and make big money playing in the NFL, it's players like George Fitzpatrick who decided to transfer, and he's looking for a starting job and hoping to start at Kansas State. It is the new era of college football that makes you just want to punch the wall, because George Fitzpatrick, whether he was competing to be the starter with Phillip Daniels on the right side, or whether or not he was the depth piece you thought you'd have through spring and into the 2025 season. Like, that would be really nice to have George Fitzpatrick in his fourth year still being on campus at Ohio State, or even Zen Mahalski in year 5 to have that opportunity, So now you're looking at your depth pieces potentially as the starting tackles at Indiana and Kansas State. Like, that would solve your problem right there. So unfortunately, we live in that world where people see an opportunity and they deserve to go get it. But Ohio State has money, and if they need a tackle and just need someone to provide some depth, you can look down into the group of 4 teams and probably find someone that would be willing to take a shot for a little bit of an extra payday.
Yeah,
not that tampering is.
Would you like to be the highest paid number 4 tackle in the country? It's not a bad sales pitch, I guess. Yeah.
I would, yes.
You just put it out on the Twitter streets, just a graphics like tackles, come on in. That's not tampering, is it? If you just say position needed, 4th tackle.
I don't think so.
No.
Yeah. Seems completely legal. I feel like you got shortchanged on this conversation, Bill. We could have gone for like 3 hours, couldn't we?
We can talk more about it if you want to. I think the way they structure the coaching is interesting too, with the 2 offensive line assistants they brought in addition to Tyler Bowen.
I did want to ask about that because, Bill, you are the guru. Like, do you know anything about Charlie Dickey or Marcus Johnson and the style that they bring, or their strengths, who they are? I've heard from recruits, especially in the Plains, as they love Charlie Dickey. Like, he is very well respected and very well liked by recruits.
I mean, he's been around forever. I think he's been coaching offensive line for 35 years or something like that. So, my favorite thing about him is that he's just been at some very good offensive line programs. Has his offensive line's always been great? No. I would even argue maybe that he was at Oklahoma State last year and they returned a lot and probably weren't as good as they were hoping to be up front last year, at least run blocking wise. But there's a lot in his background to like at a few of the stops that he's developed NFL draft picks. And then Marcus Johnson on a really bad Purdue team found a way to have 1, maybe 2 guys who are going to get drafted in this coming draft out of that program. And he's got a couple of nice recruitments under his belt too. I know that's not necessarily why Ryan Day brought them here, but there's some developmental chops there for both of them. Dickey with a much longer resume of doing so that I think will work nicely for Tyler Bowen, who like I don't view it as like, oh, they brought these guys in because Tyler Bowen can't coach the O-line, but he is doing something kind of different based on what he was doing previously. So I totally understand why they would want to take some bigger swings on those offensive line assistant positions, but also like just generally it should be exciting, I think, for Ohio State fans that the non-recruiting positional assistants that they're bringing in are like guys who were full-time, one of the 10 assistants at FBS programs last year. Like, we've come a long way, I think, in the way that Ohio State has chosen to build these staffs.
Not just last year. I mean, if you look at Marcus Johnson, he was the offensive line coach at Duke, Mississippi State, and Missouri since 2016. The guy's been around, and
I think he recruited Charles Cross to Mississippi State, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, and you compare that to Mike Soleni, who obviously very highly respected and now a full-time assistant coach for UNLV. But the difference in experience when Mike got there versus what these guys are bringing in is night and day.
Yeah, you can tell why Ohio State was chomping at the bit for so many years. But can you loosen these restrictions on the coaching staff? Because once it was like full green light, you don't have to pretend about being on field or not being able to talk to players. Once they're like, just go ahead and do it. They just can't recruit. Look at how they've mashed the pedal, especially on the offensive line. Because as you mentioned, it was not just Mike Soleni last year with Justin Fry. He also had Tim Drevno in there. So Ohio State has maximized that.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt. The difference is a guy like Drevno did not do recruiting, even really when he was on campus. Yeah, he talked to kids if they were in a camp. Charlie Dickey, Marcus Johnson, those are guys that these kids have relationships with already, and they are allowed to recruit. They're just not allowed to recruit off campus. Right. So they're allowed to have phone calls. And obviously Mike Soleni did a lot of that with Justin Fry and for Justin Fry. This is going to be a much different, like, trident of recruiting on the offensive line than we've seen.
Yeah. Point well made and point well taken. To wrap things up there on the offensive line, I guess we've got special teams left. Is that it? I don't know. I feel like we've covered everything.
Have we done quarterback? We did quarterback.
Oh,
right?
that's right. There's that quarterback
Yeah.
position. You usually save that one up until right before the start of spring ball. And frankly, I'm terrified because Berm wants it to be nothing but a controversy. So I don't know if we can even do that one.
We can do a few of them and really get the controversy going.
Just one episode on everybody, on all the scholarships.
All I'm saying is Lincoln Keenholz went on the cruise, man. That's a pretty strong endorsement.
There you go.
Yeah.
Reading the signs. Never too early for those tea leaves, even before they're even practicing, which, again, the Buckeyes get back at it in a week and a half, and we'll still be talking about things, even if we don't have position reviews and previews to go along. But Bill's right. We got to do the quarterbacks, and we will, as we get ready for the start of spring camp on March 17th for the Buckeyes. This, though, has been the offensive line breakdown on the Podcast Daily for Wednesday, a William Wednesday, in honor of our guru, as Berm would say. For Bill Landis and Jeremy Birmingham, I'm Austin Ward. Thanks for joining us again, as always, on the Podcast Daily. We'll talk to you tomorrow.